Good evening and welcome to our regularly scheduled Committee of the Whole meeting for October 13th, 2020. We will start with amendments to the agenda. Seeing none, we'll go to disclosure of monetary interest. Mayor Penko.
Yes, thank you. I will declare a pecuniary interest in item 3A, the delegation, as I have a professional relationship with one of the proponents.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor McKenna?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. In the past, I've had a pecuniary interest in anything dealing with Gallipoe Centre, and that's no longer the case, so I'll be participating fully from here on out.
Great, thank you. Any further disclosures? Seeing none, we'll move on to a delegation. Mr. Graham Bird from the GBA Group is going to present on the redevelopment of the Gallipoe Centre property. Welcome, Mr. Bird.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Back to work. I look forward someday when COVID's over to meeting all of you personally. Zoom is fun for a while, I think, but I appreciate the opportunity, and in advance would like to thank Malcolm Morris for assisting getting us organized for today. We have a presentation that I hope will assist, and simply I thought we'd take a little time to bring you up to date on what's been going on at the Gallipoe Centre over the last year, and take you through a bit of where we're attempting to travel, and hopefully with your assistance. And we'll conclude with just a request to allow the TAG and GBA team to work along with CO Morris and his staff to hopefully bring this to fruition. So I'm not sure who's in charge of the PowerPoint, but there we go. Thank you. Thanks, David. Oop. So I think a lot of this, all of you know, but I thought it would take 2 seconds just to set the table. We know the former regional center, which is situated on the kind of southeast corner of Smiths Falls, was turned to the Gallipoes in 2011, and I just want to point out that the center is an odd kind of anomaly on that boundary, sitting on a hill. There's a great treed driveway up from Queen Street to the circle, or the semicircle, and its access is in fact north-south. I'm not sure if that was intended in the first place, but it's odd that it is so. There's about 900,000 square feet, almost 1 million square feet of buildings on the campus, and we also have a bit of an odd situation where this is annexed to Smiths Falls, but there's a bit of an overlap on some of the tax fronts with our township. Sorry, just flipped to Montague, and oddly, at the front door to this center is in fact the sign that says "Welcome to Montague," or about 3 feet after it. So there's a little running story with our gang on that. Over the last while, since purchasing the TAG, as it's known, organization has been, if I could flip to the next slide, please, thank you, been gradually converting the buildings into various uses. The majority of the focus has been taking what were the bed wings for the patients and residents of the center, and reconfiguring them into apartments, and they're being dealt with as, in some cases, rental properties, in other cases, in life lease solutions. And bit by bit, that transformation is taking place. And I can say that for meeting with the tenants, I think they're very pleased with the accommodation and how that's worked out. As many of you know, there's also a theater and pool and gymnasium as part of this. And just imagining the center really had its administrative areas at the start and the southern end of the nose of the circle, and then the gym or school area for the residents, then the residents themselves, a small hospital, and on to the heating and cooling plant and supply stops to the north end of the circle. The challenge has been great, and I know that the TAG organization has worked as hard as they can, frankly, to make these changes in accordance with standards. And they're dealing with a number of anomalies. I call them, or call this a bit of a harmonization issue that over time I hope to deal with you and the folks at the town. There's been a lot of work with your fire department to review and to assess the buildings. And I can just say out loud that our friends from the town have worked hard with the TAG organization to try and get these things corrected. I think we'll bump to the next slide, please. About a year ago, our company was asked to join with TAG and help them put together a future for the Gallipoe Center and for the properties surrounding it. We brought to the table a good team of experts in environment, in engineering, in heritage and adaptive reuse. As you can see with soils geotechnical work, archaeological whiz kids and so on. And we've been working with likes of Ontario Heritage Trust to sort out an appropriate approach to the redevelopment and enhancement of the center. Our company, for those of you that don't know, has been actively engaged in the world of planning and development for 25, 30 years now. I personally studied engineering at Queen's and went on through that field, spent a little time as you folk have on the council at the City of Ottawa, so I could understand the politics of the municipality. And our company has been engaged in working with the cities or other cities, with towns, in creating fairly large communities. I'll give you the example. In a few years ago, our company was retained by the City of Ottawa to help lead the redevelopment of the Lansdowne. We're currently engaged as the lead developer and project manager for the new Ottawa Hospital. We've been working with the federal government on looking for an implementation solution of Tunney's Pasture, which is a massive administrative node under the federal government. And so our projects have been wide-ranging. They've been very complex, but I can tell you that I and my team really enjoy working on these types of projects, and I think have had good success because of that. It's fun. It's good to do. And so we brought this team together, and I think your staff would agree that they're very capable, very knowledgeable of what we're attempting to do, and we'll provide the right resources to you and to Smith Falls in accomplishing this. If I could flip to the next slide, please. When I first arrived, and I shouldn't say it that way, I've been to Smith Falls often. Growing up in the valley, it's just part of the network. But I was enjoying looking at the aerial photos of Smith Falls and reminding myself of how Smith Falls and the various highway networks join it to various communities close and far. But interestingly, the grid of the village, or of the town, excuse me, always runs at 90 degrees to these various routes that are heading off to Perth or to Carleton Place or to Brockville and so on. And when we began to look at the lands around the Galapagos Center, I was trying to get our team to appreciate how we might find a gridding system and a community system that would allow the Galapagos Center not to be, at the end of the day, something that's off limits in a way or out and about, but it truly became engaged with and became part of the fabric of Smiths Falls. And so the group has looked for ways to bring that vision onto the planning documents and to see how it should be connected into the grid of Smiths Falls, how it might appropriately join to the area where the Tweed factory is, how in time it could bring to life the edge or the community edge to the Rideau Canal, how potentially we could work together to bring the VIA station more into downtown Smiths Falls and make it an active player within the growth. But truly what I was looking for was a way to phase into play a community that would enhance, that would feel in the end to be very much a part of Smiths Falls, not some anomaly, something that's out and off the beaten track with the wrong designs and have nothing to do with the character of the town. So if I could flip to the next slide, please. Our team with John Moser, who's the Vice President in charge of planning for our company, has been working with a number of the teammates, engineers, and archaeologists and heritage whiz kids that I mentioned earlier. And we've been attempting to, as I said a few seconds ago, appreciate the various grid patterns that are indicative and part of the DNA of Smiths Falls, and looking for ways to bring that towards the Galapagos Center. It's noted in the official plan that in time, this is the one of the growth nodes for Smiths Falls. So it's in that light that we were studying the issue and looking for ways to make it so. I'll go to the next slide, please. I was just going to back up a little bit that, again, Malcolm Morris and his team have been working, I believe, diligently and enjoying the camaraderie with our team and team members. And together we've been creating a concept or draft plan for the area around the Galapagos Center. And as I mentioned, in a grid pattern and approach that would marry easily with the town's overall plan. I'm very happy to say that the teams have gotten along very well. That's certainly my vantage point or the lens through which I see this. They've been meeting with the Ontario Heritage Trust planners, their teams, working with a host of environmental players and issues. And I think to a person, it has made sense that if we can agree on the vision, that then the appropriate implementation, which would be spelled out and worked through in the various agreements, would be one that would phase the implementation over time, connected to certainly the driving force of the market, but importantly as well to fit in with the gradual growth and additions to the various utilities, sanitary systems, water systems, and so on, so as not to cause anyone to keel over in the process. It's a large and expensive undertaking, which you can appreciate. So it was important for us to hopefully get your concurrence that we're on the right track. and that so that when we're dealing with frankly investors and others that come to the planning exercise, that they will appreciate where this project can go. I'll head to the next one, please. Just ideas of the various land forms and housing forms that would go. We'll head to the next. So the vision, you can see, I think to the right on this slide, and it illustrates how the teams have worked on ways of connecting the center across to the Tweed Center and Commercial Center. How the Tweed driveway up from Queen Street is retained as part of the solution, as is the circular ring road around the center. It appears to us and appeals to us that the present institution and its gradual metamorphosis into kind of mini town center or community center is on the right track with the uses. And at the end of the day, we're thinking that a couple of community roads would be best through that ring area, so that it sets out a workable solution, quite frankly, for each of the component parts of the present institutional buildings, and allows us to take on the project in a phased way, so that bit by bit we bring the inside the ring to life. Our sense is that on the outer side of the ring should in fact be ones that reinforce that community center or the town or the neighborhood center, and it may be a mix of businesses and retailing solutions that help do that. And then the rest of the property would be divided up into a number of phases. And our sense is that the northwest corner is the spot to get started with on the first phase. And it would have a various mix of housing to deal with affordability and the other issues that are facing the industry today, but allow us to bring to life in a phased solution about 200 or 250 units at a time. And therefore over 10, 12, 15, maybe 20, as much as 20 years to allow this neighborhood to unfold. There's lots of issues, as I was mentioning, about the internal roads, the long-term maintenance and operations of the recreation centers, the health centers and so on that are part of this. And there's lots of questions about the gradual implementation of the infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier. So if I see that the conclusion there requires us to go through a number of steps, from the official plan to the subdivision to the drafting of permits and bylaws and so on, it seems to me that through that process and with Malcolm Morris and his team, that we can lay out the appropriate way through all of this process, but on the understanding that we're heading to the right vision. If I could go to the next slide, please. So I'm not exactly sure whether this is the right way to do it, but I guess the ask today, Mr. Chairman, and to members of council, was to allow or to encourage our team to work with Malcolm Morris and his group to refine the concept plan, to work on preparing an implementation plan that would run concurrently, to deal with the various official plans and development permit bylaw amendments that are needed for this site, and to promote the idea of a very smart and efficient phasing of the redevelopment, so as not to tip over anyone's boat. We've got lots of formal applications to consider, and we're also looking for ways, with Malcolm's help, to deal with some of the severances and financial issues within the ring as you may appreciate, the million square feet is in fact by itself off Queen Street quite a ways, and it's time for us to look for methods to go through, I think, a committee of adjustment or some other solution that would allow for the individual financing of these projects. And so we're looking for that. And I guess the final one was something I called normalization. And what I mean by that is that I think the Gallipoe Center has been living as an institution under provincial operations and rules. And as such, it's inconsistent with the typical town or city rules and bylaws and who owns what, and who maintains what. And I'd hope that our discussions could gradually find a method by which at the end of this, the roads would be in the city's hands, the housing would be dealt with as it normally is, the utilities and so on would be in the appropriate hands, such as gas, rather than being in the building, and we would recreate them in the right of ways and do the things that are normal, as I call it. And so that's what's meant by the point number 4, that we find a method where gradually we move from what is today to something that is a very proud neighborhood within Smith Falls, and that it is normal to those that live in the community in terms of who does what, who do we call, and so on. I think that's it, Mr. Chairman. I think I've got to the end. Is that right? Yes, I have. My memory's good. So I thank you all for your patience, and Mr. Chairman, I'm in your good hands if there are questions or.
Thank you, Graham. That's an exciting presentation. We'll open the floor up to questions now. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Mr. Bird. On the graph with the color scheme of the layout of the entire complex, I couldn't get it to blow up any larger than what was on there. Could you just describe what those color schemes are for me and what they indicate? I think there's different kind of housing and commercial applications in certain colors, but if you could just walk me through the red and the purple and the blue for a second.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm wondering if I could ask our good friend to put the slide back up, or you're able to see it and I'm not.
I can see it. I just can't. It's so small. I couldn't get it to get in.
Yeah. So this is the after good discussions with your head of planning and their team and ours, was to look for an appropriate mix of housing and a mix of commercial and a mix of institutional that would make a good community and follow the practices of today. So if I start down on Queen Street, the first section next to the OPP station are all commercial. So things like hotels or stores or things of that nature would fit in those zones. Now again, we've set up the break behind it so that from there through to the north side of the property would be mixes of parks. You can see large square ones to the right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how else to point at this.
The light blue is.
You're following that? There's quite a creek and environmental system along the west side of the property, which is adjacent to where the hydro lines come down. There's quite a substantial creek and environmental zone there. In fact, I know that our team, along with Carl and his team, spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out where to put that road from the center through to Tweed, finding the right spot through an environmental exercise that took quite a bit of time. So then we see lots of parks there, and you'll note quietly that there are linear parks that join the main parks. and I'm not saying this is the final form, Councillor, but the idea is that there are very substantial parks in each one of the phases that then for biking or walking trails would be joined by linear paths in and around. And then the blue, I'm a little colorblind, I'll confess, but the colors set up for singles, semi, and townhouses. Where we see the more mid-rise or anything of density would be close to or inside the loop.
Okay.
So that we create this feeling of a small community center. And it's in there that the community center-like activities, the pool, the theater, the gymnasiums, and the schools and training areas, the art programs that are going on now would in fact be embellished.
That's
So
helpful. Thank
that's
you.
kind of what we're up to. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, Councillor Dwyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through the chair, Mr. Bird, you have taken on an incredibly ambitious and hopeful project, and I think everyone in the town of Smiths Falls is going to be waiting with bated breath to see how this project ends up. I mean, the Rideau Regional Center has had a long history within our community, both as a point of employment and a residence for many residents of Smiths Falls. Some of which has contained a jaded and emotional history. So I think we need to be sensitive to that. But I think the proposal that you have presented shares the expectation that was laid out when this property first came in to the town of Smiths Falls, which was to create an integrated facility within the town that continued to offer connectivity to the residents that live in Smiths Falls, to the spaces that are out there. And I think that's integral going forward. And I think from what you've presented, that seems to be the clear intent. If you don't mind, could you clarify how many residential units you were proposing at this point? In draft stage, of course.
Certainly, yes. Couple of things. Thank you for the comment, because that's certainly been our mission and the lens through which we're assessing and working with our teammates on it. I want to see a very comfortable neighborhood of Smiths Falls, one that physically connects. And as you appreciate, this thing feels like it's way out in the boonies right at the moment and disconnected. So every brushstroke that we do, we're hoping to bring that familiarity and that connectivity to it. In terms of unit numbers, at the moment we were looking at, and I'm just thinking out loud, about 1,500 or 1,800 would happen over the probably 15 years. Again, phased so that I know that with our friends Troy and others that are dealing with the augmentation of the sewer systems, water systems, and so on, we've got to find a process that allows this to take place in a timely fashion, but in a responsible fashion. So that's kind of where we landed at the moment. I know that as the studies go on, the other advantage of the phasing is that it allows the town and TAG to maybe manipulate that up or down as it goes along, meeting the housing stock and affordability, or responding to affordability issues and so on as it moves forward. But using pretty typical town, semi, and single formats, it arrives in that 1,500 neighborhood.
Okay.
And you think of it.
No, I can appreciate that. I mean, that's sufficient for our needs right now. I mean, it's just a ballpark
That's right.
net density across the subdivision. I think you're wise to try and normalize the site, and I can appreciate that that's the approach that you're trying to take. I can also appreciate the fact that you're being realistic about the phasing and developing the existing asset first before looking at the frame lands. And I think that's wise, and I think it shows that if you are indeed successful in revitalizing the building stock that's existing there today, it'll give more credibility to the project as it goes forward. And I think that's going to help with the acceptance of the community for the vast density that's going in there. I mean, 1,500 units is ambitious. particularly considering we've been planning for a growth rate of, upwards of 25 units a year, based on our recent influx. I mean, we're a sleepy town that used to have 9. And 25 is now a lot. So I can appreciate that you're aiming for that. 15 years might be a little short, but we'll get there.
That's right.
And I'm sure that Troy will be instrumental in walking you through what would be involved in putting 1,500 units through our water and wastewater plant.
That's correct.
I think generally speaking, the vision that you're presenting is reflective of what the community wants to see out there. And I look forward to seeing it go forward. And I think my understanding is that based on tonight, you just want to present that vision and then seek direction to continue to work with staff, which you've already been doing. And I don't see any concerns with that. The only concern that I do have is one of the points that you raised in your presentation was about the assumption of the private servicing on the site. And I think it's fair to assume that eventually this subdivision, if it is indeed a subdivision, reverts back to municipal ownership for private or public assets. But I think there's a distinct difference between assuming infrastructure that has been developed as part of a new subdivision and assuming a water line that has been installed in the 1950s. So I think that's where you can continue to negotiate with staff, and they can look out for the municipality's best interest to ensure that the type of infrastructure we are assuming is fair and reasonable. I mean, we, as much as we like to see the project go forward, I think we want to be cautious about what sort of bodies are buried out there and what we're finding.
So, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And yes, I understand exactly about existing roads, existing pipes, age, and so on. And it was why I was suggesting, and I think, you're very familiar with this, I can tell, that if we could figure out a plan of attack that allowed for the gradual implementation. If you think about, the subdivision system works, where it's the roads aren't put over into the town's hands, even though they're agreed to and they're in the land titles in the first place, until the number of homes are completed and life's in good shape and tax dollars are coming in. That's when the town takes over responsibility. I think if we're, I know we are smart enough. I hope that we can find a way where we do similar things with the mains, so that perhaps through this process, there's a way of redoing them, recreating them, and bringing them to standards, so that transformation up against a number of units, when there's enough tax dollars, can actually get put into the town's hands. Because I can tell you practically and respectfully to even my friends in the Galapos, the idea that they're going to be in the water main business for the rest of their lives doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I think if we can find that way to go through the metamorphosis from today to tomorrow, where things are in the right hands, and we find the ways to make sure that the payment structures and the maintenance structures are appropriate. It seems to me, for example, we could take the main right-of-way from Queen Street up to the circle and put that right-of-way into land titles in Smith Falls' hands, but under a management agreement with the town, TAG stays responsible for doing it until perhaps we have, 300, 400 residents, and there's enough tax flow coming in that it's now time for the town to take over and respect that obligation. So there's some little magic puzzle here that I know that Malcolm and your staff are up to, and I'll try and keep with them. How about that?
Thank you. We've got Councillor Alfred and then Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an exciting, it is the last large piece of land we have within our boundaries. So naturally, this is a good news. Your vision is a good news story. It comes as Councillor Dwyer has pointed out, and you're completely aware how complicated this is going to be. The vision that you have is certainly one that the town, I'm sure, would be interested, our residents would be interested in undertaking. But there are some first steps. You mentioned that one of the barriers, one of the obstacles to this is getting taxpayer dollars into our hands so that we can move forward in a measured way, as you've outlined. There's a large question there for our staff to work out with Montague, and I would be very interested in staff bringing back to us what our next steps are as a municipality in order to facilitate your vision and position Smiths Falls for success in supporting your vision as you've outlined. I think it is an exciting project. It is, as Councillor Dwyer said, ambitious. But if you spice it out over 20 years, and we take the first few years of those as they're phased in, I think that this could be something. It is, as I say, the last piece of property we have to develop in our town with any size. So this vision is something I could support. We're a long way from having all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, but in terms of your vision, I think it's a valuable one and could be quite valued to our town.
Thank you, Councillor, and I agree. I think I mentioned it's always been odd to me as I drive to the Tag Center that I see this Montague sign about 5 feet beyond, and I think this is curious. There's a bit of a moving puzzle that needs to be, I think, sorted out. Makes sense too.
Yes, and only recently it's come to light for myself. I don't know, I can't speak for my other councillors, that there's a revenue sharing agreement with regard to the taxes that will have to be addressed tout suite.
You're right onto it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thanks, Councillor Alford. Councillor Brennan.
Yep.
Thanks, Graham, for this, and thanks for your interest in Smiths Falls. It's good to see you again. I think that what you presented is pretty high level, as you know, and I don't think that this is going to be the last time we're going to be talking about it, because it's an exciting project. And as my colleague, Councillor Dwyer, said, this is what we were looking for when we annexed that land, and so thanks for coming. And there's going to be lots of questions, i.e., capacity for services and all the rest of it. But I don't think we need to get into those weeds right now. All we need to do is say, as a council, let's continue down this road, and I'm all for that. So thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Brennan. Councillor Allen.
Yes, like my colleagues, this is an exciting thing to be considering for our town. And I want to just point out, in addition to what has been commented on already, that I was very happy to see that the cultural heritage assets and aspects of this, for many people, this building and this whole area has a strong history of either having residents living there or working there, and it's a very important part of our town. So the fact that you're looking at the cultural heritage of, for instance, the driveway, I mean, it's one of those things that should have been designated years ago. It's one of the most beautiful driveways you would find anywhere. The fact that you are honoring those things, I appreciate that very much. And like my colleagues, I look forward to hearing more about this as we go forward.
Thank you, Councillor. I know this is maybe competition or something, but John Stewart, who I've worked with for a long time, actually lives in Perth, is head of Commonwealth Historic Resources, and I've had the good pleasure of working with John most of my life on very complicated heritage solutions. One example would be And some of you may know that the Heritage Central Chambers, which is the home for the NCC right near the War Memorial in Ottawa. And that's the one that John and I first worked on. And we spent a couple of years sorting out all of the bits and pieces of that puzzle. Very important to the federal history of this country. So I've gotten to have a great respect for John and his ability to do this. And importantly, to find ways with the Ontario Heritage Trust to not only respect the heritage, but find ways where we can adaptively reuse those facilities in modern time. And that's always the trick. Where is how do we do it so that it fits today and respects the past? It doesn't get locked in a tomb that no one gets to appreciate. So thanks for your comment, and I'll pass that on to John.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Allen. I think everybody's had a chance to comment. It's very exciting to see this project. It's I don't think back in 2009 when the annexation happened and the employment scene wasn't very positive and the hospital was closing and all these things were going on that anybody could have pictured a vision like this today, 10 years later. So very exciting, and we look forward to seeing how your vision is going to allow this property to rise at the falls. Any further questions or comments before we CO Morris?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So thanks to Graham and his team for being with us tonight and sharing the vision. We felt it was important to have a public discussion about the journey that's being proposed, if we can use that analogy. And so I think my recommendation to committee would be for staff to come back with a roadmap, really, of this journey and lay out kind of the first steps and steps along the way. It's a long road, but we'd like to get started if it sounds like committee's endorsing moving to the next step. So I would say the next step would be for staff to come back and just lay out what needs to be done. It was mentioned there's some planning gymnastics, so to speak, that need to be done on this file. There's some servicing studies that need to be considered in a very real way. But I think the challenge here is that it is an anomaly, and while that might be viewed as a negative thing, I think Graham and his team are turning it into a positive. This is a transformational project, and taking something that's been institutional since its beginning and transforming it into a community is a exceptionally exciting process. So I think with your permission, we'll come back with a roadmap and we can talk about the various steps, some realistic timeframes, who's going to do what, and then perhaps that will provide an opportunity to provide some more meaningful endorsement of how we get to where we want to be. So I would suggest that staff will do that over the next several weeks, and we can have a fulsome discussion as a priority item on a future agenda.
Thank you, CO Morris. I'm seeing nodding heads, so I think we have consensus for your recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Bird, for joining us tonight, and we look forward to following this project as it evolves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to members of council, much appreciated. And thank you, Malcolm.
All right, so moving on to our next item, we've got adoption of minutes for Monday, September 14th and Monday, September 28th, Committee of the Whole meetings. Can I get someone to move to accept the minutes? Councillor Alford, seconded by Councillor Brennan. All those in favor? It's carried. We will move on to CIO Directors Reports. CO Morris.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have 3 in total, starting with Chief Cheeseborough.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 updates for you. Our regular scheduled control group meeting from last week. We had discussions with regards to the active cases that are taking place in Lanark, Leeds, Grenville. As of last Thursday, there was 9 active cases. And certainly it was appeared that it's becoming more apparent in the younger demographic for positive case. There's been no cases in the long-term care. There's been a new required screening protocols within the workplace for employees and contractors, which was launched by the health unit. A joint presentation with public health and legal departments to educate larger employees and manufacturers on dealing with outbreaks in the workplace. That's taking place on the 15th. And then a presentation geared to the municipality will be taking place on the 16th, of which we'll have 2 or 3 staff members present during both those presentations. There's been testing site increases included in Kentville, which has alleviated the strain, certainly in the Brockville and surrounding areas, allowing those sites to stay open with the ability to test more individuals. Labs are ramping up the testing, but there continues to be an overstrain on the labs, resulting in delayed testing turnarounds. As of last Thursday, there was approximately 70,000 tests that had been shipped to the United States, to New Jersey, from Ontario, to have those tests processed and confirmed to try to get them back to the individuals in a timely manner. The number of days for isolations has been reduced from 14 days to 10 days. They have determined that isolation, it's usually a 5-day before you recognize that you have it or you should get tested for it. And then if you are or you're not, then 10 days is more than adequate for the isolation. Guidelines on symptoms requiring testing have helped reduce the strains as well. Chimo School was limited to a single case, which did have a community spread, leading to the identified outbreak, which has now been corrected, and there are no further outbreaks. Our annual exercise for compliance for emergency management, as that indicated in the previous reports, is not required for this year. However, the documentation and paperwork must still be completed and filed with the government, so they have that on file. The Ontario Association of Fire Chiefs, in partnership with TSSA, has developed a safety guideline protocol for patios wishing to remain open and have heaters for the outside. And again, this was an item that was brought forth a while ago, but now they've put out the guidelines, and that will be distributed to all the businesses so they can review it, and if so, can follow those guidelines or have something to take a look at and determine whether or not they're adequate for their application. Halloween was discussed in an ongoing situation, and we're waiting direction from the province of Ontario with regards to that. Thanksgiving communications was issued by the government on how to enjoy the holiday safely. And again, that was indicated that you should only have Thanksgiving dinner with members of the immediate household, no extended members. Mask wearing protocols within apartment complexes was discussed at our meeting, and this will be discussed. I believe that the mayor will be discussing that with council tonight to determine whether or not to move forward on that. Other jurisdictions have passed bylaws regarding that. And the mask wearing requirement for all contractors and external workers at municipal buildings will be enforced, and we will ensure that people coming into the building are protected and protecting our staff. Staff will be, we're also reminded to wear the mask when they're outside their regular work area where 6 feet cannot be accommodated. Remembrance Day options are being discussed with the Royal Canadian Legion and the provincial requirements for COVID protocols on outdoor gatherings. It's certainly a recommendation that telecasts and virtual dealings with Remembrance Day take place. And that was our update for last Thursday. As of Friday, the province came out with revoking stage 3 back to stage 2 within some of the major jurisdictions. Toronto, Mississauga, the GTA area, and lastly, the Ottawa area, which has a direct impact with regards to Smith Falls. We thought that it was prudent that we meet today to discuss what our next steps would be in the event that there is large increases in the Ottawa area with shutdowns of the restaurants and the bars and the major facilities. And certainly, as of the weekend, Director Manhire and his staff are receiving phone calls from sporting teams wishing to use the arena. And we discussed that today, and as a result, those groups were denied to be booked into the Smith Falls Arena. It's imperative that we maintain the straight and narrow as we've been doing over the last number of months if we want to maintain control over the situation within Smith Falls and continue where we're at stage 3 and not get bumped back. Discussions with the health unit today, there's approximately 1 to 2 infections per day in our region. And this is directly connected to the Ottawa area. School outbreaks are now over, so there are no current outbreaks in the schools. Again, Halloween was one of the main topics for today. And again, we're waiting for the province to make a decision on that. And we're hopeful that they can come out with the details about trick-or-treating and doing that in a safe manner. Communities are asked to be a little more creative on how we're approaching this to ensure that we're not going to have increased outbreaks. Other events, again, Remembrance Day can happen through drive-by or drive-throughs or virtual options. And again, these are recommendations from the health unit. Ottawa cases are continuing to rise. As of today, 116 cases reported today. So it's quite apparent that if we're not at the start of the second wave, we're certainly in the middle of it. And we've taken a look at the numbers over the weekend for the province of Ontario. Certainly almost 1,600 cases have been reported in a 2 or 3 day period. So we've got to continue exactly doing what we're doing. Our stage 3 guidelines will remain in place unless the health unit and the medical director of health direct us otherwise. We had a healthy discussion regarding proactive versus reactive in our messaging and how stringent we should be or how direct we should be with the general population to ensure that they have a clear and concise understanding that if we deviate from our current path that we're going down, that this will result in a potential stage 2, reverting back to a stage 2. So again, we want to make sure that the messaging is not a fear factor or a scare tactic, but certainly a reality check. And if you look around at the jurisdictions that have been placed back in stage 2, quite obviously that messaging hasn't gone out strong enough in those areas, which it has now with that placing them back in a stage 2. We further discussed our contingency plans within each of the departments to ensure that each of our department heads and management team have a contingency plan in place in the event that we end up going back to stage 2 or God forbid, stage 1. So we want to make sure that we still have continuity of operations, which is required by the province during any pandemic or during any state of emergency. We discussed council meetings at the present time, and again, this is your decision to continue meeting virtually unless council makes a decision to do otherwise. The management team can work remotely, and we have ensured that we have proper coverage in the various areas should one of the management team's members be unable to continue in their duties. We have the cross-training that other staff can take over that and carry the load until such time they can return. The testing facility at the senior centers is being considered for the winter months. Unfortunately, they were Dr. Guppy and the staff at the hospital were looking for drive-through options, but unfortunately, there are no drive-through options within Smith Falls that were available at the time. The seniors' activities will be moving to another location, and that decision is currently pending approval by the seniors and by Dr. Guppy. Mr. Chairman, that is my reports for tonight.
Great. Thank you, Chief. Do we have any questions? Councillor Brennan.
Thanks, Chief, for this, and thanks to the Emergency Control Group for your work. One question that came up for me while you were giving your report is on testing. Do we know how many tests are done in Smith Falls or the Lynn on a regular basis?
Through the chair, we don't have a total number on that. The health unit has the numbers. We haven't been provided, nor have we asked the numbers. But what I can tell you, in Ontario, they were up to 63,000 test cases. But it hasn't been broken down for us, but we can certainly inquire and get those.
Well, that would be good to know. I mean, I think that the question that I get a lot of times is like, you know, this is a problem. It's a problem in Ottawa. Ottawa is our neighbor. and what's going on in Smiths Falls, and not Lanark West, but Smiths Falls specifically. I know there's privacy concerns that the Chief Medical Officer of Health has, but that's not providing names. So that would be something I'd be interested in. And also on Halloween, I read late this afternoon that Dr. Tam, the Chief Medical Officer of Health for Canada, has said Halloween could go on. And I know we have no direction from the province at this point, which would be helpful, or from the local health unit. But my question would be, do we have as a municipality any say in terms of what goes on in Smiths Falls at Halloween?
Through the chair, unfortunately, only the Premier and Government of Ontario and/or the medical directors of health can cancel public activities. And to date, they have not done that. So under Section 8 or Section 22 of the Health Act, and that question was posed to our medical director of health. But again, we're extremely hopeful that we will be able to continue with the activities in an enhanced or modified state to ensure that there is safety for the children that are out there, and certainly for the parents who live and work in Smith Falls. So at this point, we're hopeful, and I think what the government is going to do is, it's my opinion that the government is going to take a look at the numbers over the next week and make that final determination as to whether we proceed or they issue another regulation that is not going to permit it. Something that we also need to understand is the municipality's ability to enforce any of the regulations. So any regulations that come out poses a tremendous strain on local municipalities to enforce that. And you know, if you got 1,000 kids going door to door on 200 streets, it's going to be, you know, a difficult task to try to restrict that.
Yeah, I understand that, and you know, my expectation would be people will follow direction. I think we've displayed that already. So, you know, it's not only the children that are going out, but it's the people answering the door. So how are they going to handle it? And there needs to be some clear communication about how, because it's busy in Smith Falls, and we draw from outside of the town as well. So there needs to be some clear communication on how it's going to be handled. Hopefully that comes soon.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brennan. Any further comments for the chief? All right, thank you, Chief Cheeseborough. Lots of information coming out of the committee, and it's good to get an update. Thank you. Theo Morris.
Yes, so next up we have Director Dunlop to talk about public works activities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 4 updates for the committee this evening. The first update we wanted to share is you may have seen we have a new electronic LED speed display sign on Cornelia Street. As you head out of the subway and head easterly, that sign is part of a traffic calming effort to try and get the speeds down on Cornelia Street past Union Street. We had hoped to get that installation in earlier this year, but there were some delays in ordering the equipment due to the pandemic. But I would like to acknowledge the town's Transportation Advisory Committee was very instrumental in the purchase of that as a solution for that area. The feedback we've received from the residents on Cornelia is they're very pleased that some action's been taken, and we're going to be monitoring that pilot over the next several months. So hopefully we'll see some change in drivers' behaviors. The second update this evening, our LED streetlight conversion program is very much done. One of the steps that's part of the contractor's obligations is to file grant applications with the IESO for our energy rebates. Back in April of this year, we had reported to council that we were expecting those rebates to be in the order of 18,000, just over 18,000. And we received confirmation last week that that number is actually 51,958. So we're receiving upwards of $33,000 more in grants now confirmed. So those are firm numbers to report tonight. Third item tonight, on the ATV front, we did hear from Councillor Alford last meeting, looking for an update on the pilot that council had approved. We have reached out to the Police Services Board, and we're going to be pulling together any information they have on noise. fines, et cetera, and we'll be bringing that information back to council. Last update this evening is the Beckwith Street project. Unfortunately, we are a little behind our forecast that we had shared with council on September the 28th. You'll see when you're going through the job site right now, we have 4 separate trades that are competing for space to do activities. We've got a concrete contractor working on the islands and the curbs and the remaining sidewalk panels. We've got electrical being done by Black & McDonald at the traffic signals. Landscaping work, that's the interlock and the tree planting by UCC Group, and of course, Tomlinson as a road contractor on the job. Just to give you a forecast of this week, certainly we had a bit of a setback with some heavy rain this morning, but the concrete contractor is now finishing up the concrete work and those tactile accessible plates at the intersection of Main Street. Right now, this week, they're going to be then deploying to the intersection of Russell to finish that work. Behind them will be the landscape contractors. They're going to be finishing those 3 islands in the center of the street. We hope to see that wrap up on Thursday. Again, they'll be coming in behind the concrete contractor and doing the interlock at Main Street late this week. Moving down the line, our electrical work, Black & McDonald is focusing on pulling wire for the traffic signals at Russell Street. You'll see that we still have those temporary signals mounted overhead. By the end of this week, we're going to be moving forward with the installation of the pedestrian activated buttons. You'll see those yellow buttons installed at the new signalized intersections. We're hoping to go forward with an ESA inspection on the Hydro Works and go live at the end of the week for the Chambers Street intersection. I would like to report, we did have a setback. You will see when you're driving at the bottom of the street, you're going to see this beautiful black traffic signal plant there at Subway, at Chambers and Beckwith Street. On the corner of the bridge, we still have an old pole located there. The bolt square did not match up with the new pole that was arrived at the site, so we were not able to install that pole. Not an easy fix, and that section of the bridge that pole is mounted on is actually cantilevered, so there's thin air underneath that, so it's a bit complex. We're working on a solution for that. Paving schedule, I can report that the paving crews from Tomlinson are arriving on site on Thursday. They will be here to stay, weather permitting. If weather plays along, we can complete the base course of asphalts on the street by Thursday and Friday. We've been working with Tomlinson to encourage them to, again, accelerate their schedule in light of the challenges we've seen. You probably noticed in the last couple of weeks, they've worked a lot of longer days. Coincidentally, they are planning to work this upcoming Saturday on adjusting ironworks. Again, that is hopefully if we get the base course asphalts down this week. So what does that mean? That would mean that the top lift paving would be happening next week, and that would be after the traffic signal loops are placed. So we are a bit behind. I do hope everyone continues to see the progress and the change that's happening on the street daily, and I thank everyone for their patience. But that's the schedule that I'm reporting this evening in light of where we're at today.
Great, thank you, Director Dunlop. Any questions, comments? Councillor Brennan.
Thanks, Troy, and for the reports. And I'm really, I haven't checked out the Cornelius Street speed sign, and I will do that. But I think that may be something we can talk about at the Traffic Advisory Committee for, I'm thinking like streets like Brockville, Jasper, Queen Street. They're really, I think they're effective. They sure are for me when I see them in other communities. So hopefully that's the first of maybe 2 or 3 more. But thanks, Troy.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none. Well, thank you very much, Director Dunlop. We look forward to seeing the street come together day by day.
Yeah. Thank you.
CO Morris, do we have one more?
Yes, one more. It'll be fairly quick. Committee may recall back on August 10th, I had provided a verbal update on a announcement that the federal infrastructure minister, the Honorable Catherine McKenna, had made on August 5th. Essentially, that announcement allocated 10% of a very large pot of money for a resilience stream of funding under the ISIP program. Anyway, that's a mouthful, but what that means is $3.3 billion have been allocated for resiliency projects across the country. Approximately 1.2 billion of that will be spent in Ontario. So staff have been working on candidate projects for a potential application. We've done the selection screening criteria. We have a recommendation to make to you, but we discovered today from AMO that the province and the feds have yet to work out the infrastructure agreements that would enable the partnership to happen. So the application process has not started yet, but I can assure you we're ready to apply when it does. So once we get the final criteria, the only criteria we had was fairly broad criteria that was in the press release. So once we get that, we'll finalize our recommendations and bring that forward and hopefully get an application in soon. The clock is ticking. The program is meant to have projects completed by the end of 2021. So any projects of significant scope, that's a fairly tight time frame. So we're hoping that the federal government, our partners at the federal government, will also look at the time frame to make sure that we have sufficient time to complete reasonably large projects. Nonetheless, all this is to say that we'll have a recommendation, I hope, in the very near future for a project that we can move forward and make application. And I should add, it's up to 80% funded by the federal government, so not insignificant amounts of money. So more to come on that one once we get more clarity on the program details. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great news. Any questions, comments for CEO Morris? Seeing none, we'll move on to correspondence items. We have one letter from the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Since it's not very often that we get a letter from the minister, or a member of staff would get kudos from the minister with the personal signature on it, I would like council's permission to read the letter, if there's consensus. Seeing nodding heads, it's from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Office of the Minister. Dear, he's crossed out Ms. Kuzil and put Janet. I am pleased to inform you that you are one of the 15 winners of the 2019 Financial Information Return Award. Thank you for your efforts and contribution in ensuring that timely, reliable, and accurate financial information was submitted for the Town of Smith Falls 2019 Financial Information Return. Your municipality will be identified on the FIR website as one of the winners of this award. As you know, the FIR reports capture important financial and statistical information for each municipality in the province. This assists the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing in providing the most current information to the growing number of users of our municipal database and provides important information to inform government decision-making. Thank you for the leadership and diligence your municipality has demonstrated in this important area. Sincerely, Steve. And then he's written congratulations at the bottom. So big thank you to our treasurer, Janet Kuzil, and great to have that coming through council. Moving back to the agenda, we've got priority issues 7A. Mayor Panko for the Housing Task Force report.
Yes, thank you. This is a fairly lengthy report. I think waiting for Dave to bring it up on the screen, but I'll have a chance to review the PowerPoint as I go through the slides. And we'll also have our senior planner, Carl Granke, and Director Casello chime in at times where appropriate. So the, I guess next slide, please, Dave. The formation of the task force was obviously a key priority in our strategic plan. The task force was formed late last year. It was composed of a broad group of housing and community stakeholders, including a realtor, housing developer, landlord, tenant, a senior representative, not-for-profit housing provider, and representatives from Leonard County Housing, or Health Unit, Rudy Community Health Services, Canopy Growth Corp, St. John the Evangelist Anglican Church, and individual from the community at large. Our inaugural meeting was held last December, about 4 times before the pandemic slowed our progress, but sufficient work was completed by our May 11th meeting we reconvened during the pandemic to direct staff to draft the interim report that is being shared here tonight. Next slide, please. The task force worked diligently to fulfill the mission statement. And although the mission is a broader statement focused on the overall supply of housing in town, the task force focused in on the dire need for affordable housing. A separate committee was formed to delve deeper into the root causes of housing inaffordability in an effort to help add clarity and understanding to the work of the task force. Next slide, please. So the term affordable housing is broad. The broad term, its meaning varies from person to person. There are a number of stages in this housing continuum the task force discussed. However, it was concluded the housing types at each end of the continuum were beyond the scope of the task force. And the recommendations we will review tonight focus primarily on affordable rental housing. Next slide, please. So although for decades, almost half of our citizens have rent their homes, there's been very, very few new rental units added in our inventory, to our inventories in the past 20 plus years. In fact, between 1996 and 2016, although 190 new single family homes were constructed, which is still about 9 or 10 a year, only 60 new rental units were built in that 2-decade period, or about 3 a year. Lanark County Housing owns and manages 269 RGI, rent geared to income units in town, but all these were constructed decades ago. The wait list for RGI units rose over 10% between 2018 and 2019, and the average wait time for an RGI unit is currently over 5 years. Next slide, please. So although it appears there's a growing need for emergency and even transitional housing in Smiths Falls, I believe we all agree that the best long-term solution to preventing homelessness is keeping people housed where they are and ensuring there's an adequate supply of affordable housing in our community. Next slide, please. So tenants who have remained in their homes for a number of years and tenants who are able to continue living in their current environments do not face the same affordability challenges as those currently looking for a new unit and those that face a prospect of unaffordable market rent. Tenants move more frequently than homeowners, and today's rental environment in town, they face greater affordability challenges every time they move. The rise in our local economy in recent years has led to a housing boom beyond anything we previously experienced. Between Bellamy Farm and Maple Ridge Estates, hundreds of new homes have been approved via plans of subdivision. In 2020 alone, so far this year, Council has approved zoning changes or site plan approvals for new developments that will add over 300 new rental units if all are constructed. However, although this will add significantly to the overall housing supply in the next couple of years, it does not address the dire need for affordable housing. The next slide, please. So the task force has approved and endorsed 17 recommendations in our interim report. So at this stage, I'll turn the screen over to Senior Planner Carl Granke to review the first 12 of these recommendations, and Director Costello will step in for recommendation number 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just working on, there we go, I have the video up. So I'm going to be focusing on a number of draft recommendations endorsed, suggested by the task force that focus on things that we really have control over as a municipality, specifically in the policy and regulations. And next slide, please. So one of these things, and this is something that we've just give me a second here, having oh, there we go. So one of those is parking, and certainly this subject has come up quite often, both within the parking study as well as the task force, and that's the requirement for parking, and that's perceived as a barrier to creating affordable housing units. So most of our zoning categories require 1.25 parking spaces per unit, which is sort of at the higher end of the average in our comparator municipalities. So over the next year or so, we're going to be undertaking a zoning bylaw review, and one of those and this is the opportunity to address a lot of these potential solutions. And one is to take a look at parking and see if we need that 1.25 in certain circumstances. Certainly, we can't really go. We may not want to go too far down, especially in a municipality without public transit or other sort of mass options. However, we may be able to look at some circumstances where we can reduce the 1.25, and the task force heard a presentation from the city of Belleville where they had a similar parking requirement that resulted in a large asphalt parking lot that was rarely used associated with the residential development, and that of course drives up development costs. It has other impacts. Next slide, please. Secondary dwellings. The province has certainly gone part way in terms of recent amendments to the Planning Act that require us to accommodate secondary dwellings both within the existing dwelling and also outside of the existing dwelling. So that would be a coach house or a tiny house or however you want to call it. But we will be obligated to update our zoning bylaw and official plan policies to accommodate additional options for secondary dwellings. So that's certainly an easy recommendation that would bring us in line with the provincial requirements. Next slide, please. Minimum dwelling size requirements. Those are common in zoning bylaws. However, those are also viewed as a barrier to creating additional housing. And some municipalities have reduced or removed these minimum dwelling size requirements from zoning bylaws. So that's the task force is recommending our zoning review take a look at that and explore options to reduce that. Next slide, please. Minimum lot size is another suggested thing that we have a look at. Ultimately, smaller lots yield more units per hectare and can lower costs for single family lots. So the task force recognizes that this encourages development that provides affordable options and reduces the number of variances required to accommodate gentle infill. So the corollary, of course, to minimum lot size and increased density is the requirement to accommodate appropriate green space and recreation opportunities associated with development. So certainly we'd be looking at that through a subdivision process. Next slide, please. So mixed use zoning, this is an interesting one as well. And we're looking at it. The task force is looking at that in a couple of ends. One is our shopping center commercial zones. So the zoning and official plan categories we have for a shopping center commercial zone, so including but not limited to Settlers Ridge and a number of others throughout the town are basically single use commercial employment uses, commercial or other employment uses only. But what we see in some larger communities especially are our property owners are considering the long-term future of established shopping areas and considering allowing residential development to that's close to the existing services and also creates customers to allow the long-term sustainability of the commercial developments. So the committee, the task force is encouraging us to look at that through zoning as well and consider the appropriate mix and ranges of uses. Also within the downtown core, there's certainly good reasons why our current planning policies look for ground floor commercial development within our general commercial areas. However, there may be certain circumstances such as the rear or other non-street facing areas of the downtown buildings that where some flexibility in accommodating a ground floor residential can be considered without necessarily opening or while still maintaining the objective of the commercial streetscape. Next slide, please. So pre-zoning for density. So the challenge that we have here is that there's very little vacant land in the town that's pre-zoned for higher density residential development. So most of the lands that are intended for, that zoned for higher density apartment or townhouse development are already developed accordingly. So however, our official plan does identify certainly opportunities for for medium density residential, especially along collector roads where the services allow it. And the official plan also supports targeted, compatible, and gentle intensification. So the task force is recommending that we look at pre-zoning lands for medium density housing at strategic locations along collector roads that will provide certainty for developers and catalyze infill. So for instance, at the last meeting, Council approved a zoning amendment for what is essentially gentle infill along an arterial road. However, if the existing, if the R4 or a similar sort of pre-zone density that I think most of us agree is appropriate in that location were in place already, that would have allowed that sort of gentle development as of right without the need to go through an application process. So the zoning review can identify the areas or neighborhoods where this would be appropriate. Next slide, please. So town lands policies. The town, of course, owns several vacant developable lots that we've acquired in various ways over the years, and the town certainly does not envision itself as a developer, but we do from time to time receive bids from developers who are interested in acquiring municipal land. So this, unlike entirely private led projects, gives us a greater degree of say over the sort of development we want to see there. And we do have a bylaw to regulate the sale of municipally owned real property that's established evaluation criteria that we look at in considering bids for property. So economic impact and employment opportunities created are the primary criteria right now considering the sale of municipal land. And the task force believes that this is that we can also play an integral role in encouraging affordable housing and recommending that the bylaw be amended to include that. So that would be a somewhat symbolic but also very important step that we can take. And also, and this is the task force is recommending something that's underway and partially completed, and that's create and publicize a listing of town-owned land that's reasonably available for residential development. Next slide, please. So now I will, I'll turn the baton over to Director Costello to speak on the property standards recommendation.
Thank you, Carl. As Council's aware, we updated our property standards bylaw in 2014, 2015. We have two separate bylaws that deal with property standards. We have kind of the standard issue property standards bylaw, and we also have a yards bylaw. The yards bylaw gives us a little more flexibility to impose set fines, where the property standards bylaw is more restrictive with an appeal process. So the review that was conducted with the Housing Task Force, the recommendation coming out of that is that we look at our property standards bylaw and do a review to make landlords more to make them more, their provisions more stringent so that landlords are more accountable for their properties, both for the property and for the outside of the dwelling that is on the property. Currently, right now, I think it's worth saying that our bylaw enforcement probably spend 40 to 50% of their time doing bylaw enforcement for property standards in yards. So, you know, with the provision, with this recommendation and reviewing this bylaw and probably making the provisions more stringent and upping our enforcement for both of these bylaws, we think it will be one of the, a good outcome for the task force, but, you know, better looking town for the exterior of the buildings. One thing I did want to mention that was brought up at the task force that people aren't aware of is our bylaw officers don't have right of entry. I know there's been a lot of talk about hoarding and things of that nature regarding the inside of properties, and that's not something our enforcement officers can deal with. So that's why our property standards bylaw and yards bylaw only deals with the exterior of buildings. So the update of this bylaw will deal specifically with the outside of buildings, specifically the yards and the dwellings. And that includes any garages and sheds that are on the property or secondary dwellings as well. Back to you, Carl.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the committee was also interested in not just the regulatory the regulatory aspect that we can use and should use to open up abilities to easily develop housing. We're also interested in incentives, and one thing the committee was very intrigued by is a community improvement plan, and that's a tool that the Planning Act gives municipalities the ability to prepare plans to encourage rehabilitation initiatives or stimulate development within a community. So as we know, we have a community improvement plan right now that's in effect for the downtown area, has 4 specific programs plus additional brownfield programs that are very important and certainly have been helpful to encourage the rehabilitation of downtown properties. However, what some other municipalities have done as well is created community-wide CIPs that specifically address housing as an option, and that's and there's nothing in the Planning Act or in our official plan that limits us to a single community improvement plan. So one thing we can look at doing, and the committee is very interested in exploring, is looking at an affordable housing community improvement plan, and that would essentially offer a bit of a carrot to developers, recognizing that the private sector plays an integral role in creating housing and specifically creating affordable housing. So there's a number of ways that it can be done, including looking at through a tax abatement, similar to a tax abatement program that we have in our current CIP, looking at planning and building fee rebates, development study rebates, development charges rebate program if we were to establish development charges in the future. So there's a lot of work that would need to go into a new CIP, and that includes how long the affordability provision would apply, to which areas to which areas of the town it would apply, and of course looking at if this were to take off, then we would be looking at establishing a community improvement plan study to essentially evaluate and guide us in actually implementing this. But this is something that the committee was very intrigued by and very interested in exploring further and including within the recommendations. Next slide, please. So the next section is awareness and advocacy, recognizing, of course, that education and the building of knowledge throughout our community is important too. Next slide, please. So a residential development information guide. It's the task force has identified education for both the housing providers and residents is essential in building a resilient and sustainable community. So we work closely, of course, with other departments and residential developers through the process there, and certainly we recognize if there's any role that we can play to be of assistance, advising developers of what's available to them to assist them and also encourage affordable housing, then that would be helpful, and certainly the content would be determined and refined in consultation with different departments to the town and a housing advisory committee if that's established by council. Next slide, please. So tenant workshop and education. And the task force has learned very clearly that knowledge gaps relating to rights and responsibilities has occasionally led to conflict between landlords and tenants. And in some cases, tenants may not know their rights under provincial legislation, and landlords may also not as well. So other communities have periodically hosted workshops and legal clinics. Carleton Place has held at least one recently. So we feel that that's something that would be very beneficial in Smith Falls to empower residents and enhance the community-wide base of knowledge. And the task force also recognizes that landlords, especially smaller scale landlords, are important to include within this conversation as the landlords ultimately are their allies in creating the housing supply that's necessary to achieve the objectives of this. So I think so that's a recommendation that working on, and we'd certainly value feedback from council, from the community, and the expertise on the ground and within the community to help us to refine this. Next slide, please. So I think, so that's, and to carry on as part of that, along that theme as well, we're looking to, as part of a recommendation, is we're looking to promote education for residents and new renters. Ultimately, we recognize that that the best that entering the housing market is the first and foremost challenge, and once you're in there, a lot of doors get open to you, and we have task force members who've done a lot of work on this and recognize the importance of education, and certainly that's something that that the committee feels is an important part of the package that we make to build that community-wide knowledge base. Next slide, please. And of course, developing partnerships with not-for-profit organizations, and we recognize the importance of working with the private sector, for-profit sector, as well as the not-for-profit sector, and we're looking for establishing and enhancing a guiding strategic policy. So I think from our perspective in the task force, we recognize the importance of this. However, this is, as you can see on the slide here, there's this work requires fleshing out a little bit as well, and this is where we welcome feedback from our partners on council and within the community to help us flesh out how we want to see and give us some options for how we can develop the partnerships and really, I guess, complete this recommendation. Next slide, please. And finally, I'll just jump into the final recommendation being brought forward. Next slide, please. So we recommend that as the work of the housing task force wraps up in the coming weeks and months, we'd recommend that there's some value in sort of evolving that work into an affordable housing advisory committee that's predominantly comprised of appointed volunteer residents of the town, and that committee could sort of keep us on track in terms of implementing the recommendations. We can review the zoning policies with them, develop the education component that we're looking at. The committee can be an evaluation committee for a CIP that we may create in the future. So our final recommendation is that this committee be appointed by council to guide and advise council on the implementation of the recommendations of the task force report. So I'll turn it back to Mayor Pankow to continue with the presentation.
Great, thanks, Carl and Carrie, for your contributions, and not just for assisting with the presentation tonight, but you two collaborated and authored this report, and it's a very extensive piece of feedback collected from the task force and presented here tonight that I think the PowerPoint's one thing, it's the entire report, which has a lot more detail as well. So we wouldn't have got to this point without your collaborative efforts. And this presentation is not the conclusion of the work of the task force. It's really just one big step in what will be a longer journey. And when we look at the needs for affordable housing within our community, this is something that's going to be continuous and ongoing and will last long beyond the term of this council, of course, and many other councils. So the task force has given council the clarity and the understanding that we need to make significant policy changes and make a considerable, sustainable, long-term effort if we're truly going to make a difference in housing affordability for our citizens. As well, I want to take a moment to thank every member of the task force that contributed pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and got us to this point. And those include Councillor Allen, of course, Planner Granke, Director Costello, Sean Webster from Canopy Growth Corp, Pauline Andre from Royal LePage, Shauna Stone from Leonard County Housing, Kelly Robinson from Vito Community Health Services, Chris Samir from Guy Samir and Sons Construction, Tracy Gallipo from the Gallipo Center, Alexis Green from the Leeds Grenville Lanark District Health Unit, Jeff Mills from Cambridge Community Support, Karen Bryan from St. John, the Evangelist Anglican Church, as well as community members, Josie Whitmer, Vicki Murray, and Sean Breen. And Carl made reference to, and it's available on the website, a guide for tenants that Vicki Murray had authored and provide some great insight to people who are out there looking for a new unit, understanding that every time a unit becomes available today, there are multiple people who are looking for it. And to be the successful tenant, you need to stand out, and a lot of great tips that she included there. So we know that over 40% of our residents rent their homes. Housing vulnerability is becoming an unfortunate reality for far too many of our residents. Our homes are our sanctuaries and the foundation of our overall security for our families. So I'm really pleased with this, what we call interim report. We want to make sure we feedback from council, feedback from the community, make any revisions, and be able to deliver a final report in the very near future. Understanding that many of these changes will take some time. And in the meantime, we have people waiting for affordable housing units within our community, so we need to act quickly. So with that, I will turn it back to the chair for questions. And of course, we have Carl and Carrie here to assist with answers if necessary.
Great, thank you, Mayor Panko. Who would like to start off? Councillor Alford.
I would say Councillor McKenna and I were able to attend the first 4 pre-COVID meetings of the task force. And I was very impressed with the depth of those that participated on the task force. And I was equally, if not more so, impressed with the presentation made by the Mayor of Belleville. I think they helped to assist the task force members to focus in on some of the things that I see present in the recommendations here. So I just want to thank the task force, thank the mayor for leading it. This is important. And now, again, we're hearing about the potential for another very large undertaking of housing at the Gallipo site. And I think this is going to provide us with a roadmap to make sure that our community continues to be inclusive for all. It's not going to come without some pain while all this is happening, but I think we're very much on the right track as a municipality to be able to ensure that our community is made up of all levels, all socioeconomic levels, because that adds to the fabric of our community, always has and probably always will. So thank you, Mayor Panko, and the participants that took a part of this in those individuals from those task force that you mentioned earlier. So I don't really have anything except to say I'm supportive of continuing the roadmap that you've laid out for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Alford. Councillor McKenna.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Panko, and the committee in particular, the task force in particular, for their work and the staff. My question really is around the timing. I think, Mayor Panko, at the end of your comment, you said, we're doing this work, it's going to take time. In the meantime, there are people really struggling. So my question's around, we've broken out, the suggestion is we break them out into immediate, medium, and long-term recommendations. Immediate probably means 6 months. Is that from the final report adoption? And if so, when will we get the final report adoption? And is there some way to accelerate that? Council identified housing as strategic priority #1. And is there some way that we could, because we're a very modest resources at our disposal with Planner Grenke and Director Costello and other town staff, is there some way we can, what can be deferred or put off so that we can making that immediate definition in 6 months, not from the time the report, can we give a green light to go ahead with this tonight without waiting for a final report, so we get started on those immediate things today and not 3 months from now, is my question.
Mayor Panko?
Yeah, I think what's key at this point is any feedback from council, plus obviously feedback from the community. So I believe we can get this on Speak Up Smith Falls, get it in the media or social media quite quickly, and gather feedback, I would think, in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Subsequent to that, and I'll let Director Costello, I guess, chime in as she sees needed, necessary. This report can come back in its final version, and then Planner Granke can probably walk us through some of the challenges we would need to face in regulatory changes we would need to, and guidelines we need to follow to implement an affordable housing CIP. If we're looking at a complete review of our zoning bylaw, and I don't know if it makes sense to implement pieces of that ahead of time, or simply the awareness that we're probably open to exceptions to our zoning bylaw or changes on a case-by-case basis based on some of the recommendations of the report. But I think we want to try to do what we can to mobilize as quickly as possible, understanding, as you had mentioned, resources are limited, and I know our building and planning departments are probably busier today than they've been at many times in the past, with a lot of development projects underway, and we need to be sensitive to the realities, and I guess also discuss the possibility of investing in some outside help. And and one I'm thinking of course, is to develop the CIP. Do we need some assistance to do that? I'd like to hear from the staff for those answers.
Thank you. Mayor Panko, Director Costello, did you want to add on that?
I'll definitely let Senior Planner Granke speak to the timing for CIP and some of those bigger issues. But if we can receive public feedback, we can probably put this on Speak Up Smith Falls, as well as, links from our social media feeds, and give a couple weeks for public feedback. And then there was also a promise to bring back a final report to the Housing Task Force as kind of our wrap-up meeting. A lot of the recommendations found within the report itself will form part of our 2020 and 2021 work plans for staff. So, as soon as we get the green light from council, for a final report to see if any of the recommendations may change, we can work on our work plans for 2021. And I noticed CAO Morris just put his video on, so he may want to add to that.
CAO Morris?
Yes, thank you. The only thing I would add is if council wishes to accelerate this, we'll find the resources to do so. We don't have them in-house, but we can certainly find them. So it is a top strategic priority, and if you want it done quickly, we can make that happen.
And Senior Planner Granke, did you have something to add?
Yes, thank you. So with respect to the community improvement plan, so the CIP that we have now was done by a consultant in consultation with staff, and the Planning Act requires us to go through a process similar to that of adopting or amending an official plan. So that requires a degree of public consultation, at least one public meeting, and certainly our recommendation would be to proceed with a report sort of summarizing and proposing the framework for a CIP, and that would certainly take at the very least months to develop and create, and certainly we would work with council on establishing the budgetary priority for that.
Great. Thank you, Senior Planner Granke. We had Councillor McKenna, did you have a follow-up to that?
If I could, Mr. Chair, thank you. And again, it's not a criticism of the plan or staff's capacity. It's just if we can make this the priority that it deserves, and I believe that we are, it takes time and money, I get it. And we have the benefit of our friends from Belleville gave us the gift of all of their bylaws and all of the work that they did that we can adopt, I'm assuming, and adapt. And the other is, I noticed that we're looking at how we could better leverage our town-owned property. And, is there a way that 50% of all the sales from town-owned property go into affordable housing or go into getting this plan going? Is there, we have to put our money, it is a federal and provincial responsibility. We can only do so much at the municipal level. What I'm hearing from the people of Smiths Falls is just how desperate it's getting out there to find a place to live, and how underhoused and desperate the situation really is. So I know you understand that. I just want to echo we're heading into the cold months. This is critical. I'm glad we've gotten as far as we have. I'm just stressing to my colleagues, let's keep ensuring that this remains our #1 priority. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McKenna. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads that agreeing with making it move forward as quick as we can. We've got Councillor Alford, Councillor Dwyer, and then Councillor Brennan.
Yeah, and just a thought, Councillor McKenna just mentioned it. We're going into budget deliberations shortly, so the sooner that we have as much information as possible as to, so that we can include some of the recommendations into the budget deliberations, so we can, when that is approved, we can move forward as quickly as possible. So the Speak Up Smiths Falls, whatever else we have to do so that we can consider those things during our budget deliberations would be optimal.
Thank you, Councillor Alford. Councillor Dwyer.
Sorry. Thanks, Mayor Pankow, for providing the report. It's nice to see some conclusion to the process, as it's been a year, and it's nice to see that we're kind of making some progress. I don't know that I'm any closer to understanding what's causing 64 people in our community to report nearing homelessness. I don't know that the analysis that's been done to date really clears that up to help understand what the root of the problem is. The other thing that leaves me with questions is why we in Smiths Falls have such a high rate of turnover in our residents. When I went through the survey results, the respondents from renters indicated a very high turnover of a year, certainly no more than 3 years, residents at a specific unit before they were moving. And I don't know why that is. I can't appreciate what's causing that. I assume just finding a housing solution that is right for them. I mean, certainly the study reported that most people are living in 2-bedroom units and they're seeking 3-bedroom units, but at the same time, the average household size is 2 people, as reported in the survey. So I don't know if people are seeking housing because they're trying to overhouse themselves out of a desire of comfort, or if it's something more than that. And I don't think that the survey results really got into that. So I can't say that the result that's been presented is what I was hoping to have a fulsome understanding of in order to move the project forward. But that said, I think it did come forward with a lot of positive recommendations and things that we can do in short term that could really make a change to creating more affordable housing. And I think that that's really positive. I do like the idea of the recommended revisions to the zoning bylaw in particular, but I had a question about whether or not, and it wasn't clear in the presentation or in the staff report, whether or not those revisions to say things like reducing parking requirements were going to be affordable housing specific, i.e. If you were providing affordable housing units on a 20-year rental rate, then you could have the reduced parking, or are we looking at doing it comprehensively? And the same went for the reduced dwelling unit size. Are we looking at just reducing things so that the market rent across the town drops, or are we looking at it as an incentive to the developer to increase their unit count as a means of securing an affordable housing rental agreement? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, if I can answer it, and I'll turn it over to Carl for more of a technical answer, but on the parking requirement, I think the intent of the task force was to make allowances for more affordable housing developments or affordable units within other developments. many times with the understanding that location is going to be important, access to amenities is important, and also recognizing that a large number of people who are seeking affordable units may not own a vehicle. And so the need for parking may be more reduced than what it would be in other developments. When it comes to the minimum unit size, I believe, at least my sense from the group is that that'd be brought on a broader basis and not limited simply to affordable housing development. Understanding that overall a greater supply of housing in smaller units should create more affordability even without other provisions. And Carl, you've got probably more technical answers than I do.
No, it's okay. No offense, Carl, but I don't think I need any more than that. I think that answers my question. And again, I think that's something that we can flesh out through the statutory process as those amendments come up, but that provides enough context for me for tonight. The only thing I found, because I know Carl had mentioned that part of this discussion was to kind of figure out where council wanted to see us go with the recommendations. My only thoughts are that I would like us to clearly define what our mandate is going to be in being involved in affordable housing provision, because affordable housing is such a broad topic that involves so many players that it's very quickly something that you can start wandering into. You know, one of the recommendations was about, facilitating legal aid clinics. That's not our mandate. And there are people in the community who are doing that today. So I'd rather see us focus our efforts on something that is uniquely provided by municipalities. Things like providing a CAP. That's something where our attention should be, because we're the only ones that can do it. And with the resources dedicated to that, then we can provide more to those interested within the community to do so. Again, I mean, one of the other recommendations was marketing private assets within our land I'm sorry, it's late. The land dispensation bylaw. I don't know that there's a need for that. And I think if we're focusing our attentions there, then we're going to be taking away from our ability to deliver more meaningful service elsewhere. And so that would be my only hope. And perhaps the public consultation that we go into and what is hopefully the very soon time frame will help us kind of clarify what the public's acceptance of our mandate for providing these services is going to be. So that's it. But beyond that, I thought it's a great start. I like the idea of having a task force again, or an advisory committee in the future, because I don't think that this is going to be a static project. And I think it's going to be the type of thing that, every 4 years they should be revisiting the mandate and seeing whether or not the implementation measures that we've put into place are working or if they have to be fine-tuned. So I can appreciate that this is a very, very ambitious project, and the amount of staff resource that has gone into this has been significant. And I appreciate the kind of interim recommendations that are being made by staff and the task force. So thanks for being the stakeholder and spearheader in this. And it's nice to see your vision of affordable housing planning coming to fruition. So good on you.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Dwyer. Councillor Brennan.
Thanks. And thanks for the presentation, Sean, and for the work of the task force. I mean, this is almost omnibus, and there's a lot to chew on here for sure. And, I've been chewing on it, and I really appreciate the work. I agree with everything, but I guess, my memory is not very good. And I do know that housing was our number one priority. And in our strategic plan, what was the timeline that we set forth, CEO Morris, for this? We're 2 years in, so I just don't remember. So,
CEO Morris.
Yeah. So fortunately, I have my strategic plan at hand. And
I lost mine.
Yeah, I'll get you a new one.
Okay.
The timeline to develop a housing strategy was the second quarter of this year.
Yep.
So I think given the pandemic, I think we're largely on track.
That's good. That's great. And like I say, there's a ton of stuff in here, and it's all good. And, I think that the public input is going to be crucial. And as we go forward, I think that, what we can do immediately, we should do immediately. And what we need to really consider and make sure we do right, i.e. the CIP and that type of thing. There's stuff that is already ready to go, like the information about, affordable units available now and that type of thing. But we need to get the public input, and then we need to discuss this stuff as it comes up and as we go forward. I mean, not all at once. So, but great work. I mean, just, a great report, fantastic report. And I do support having an advisory committee to advise council going forward, and now and in the future for sure. So thanks for the work. Great job.
Thanks, Councillor Brennan. Councillor Allen, did you have any comments?
No, I have sat on that with that group. It's been very interesting, and it's I think it's sort of the basis of what this report is talking about. Having listened to people, we had a very good cross section of people, and it was a very worthwhile experience. I agree with the mayor, though. I think housing is so important. I mean, I see people all the time that are concerned about losing their rental or paying too much or not being able to afford it. There's a lot of issues that I think this housing task force looked at that's going to be helpful to our community.
Thanks, Councillor Allen. Yeah, thank you to Councillor Allen and Mayor Panko for representing council on the committee and everybody that sat in on the meetings, because it does bring a really diverse perspective to us. The three recommendations that I'm the most excited about are the first one, to reduce parking requirements. I think consistently at the council Zoom meetings now, we see developments coming through that were going to be 26 units and get knocked down to 24, or they were going to be 16, they get knocked down to 14. And we consistently lose 5 to 10% of our units based on these parking requirements. And I don't think they account well for different markets in the rental or condo people in those markets, because it's, whereas a family, a 3-4 bedroom might need 2 parking spots, you might only need 1 for a bachelor apartment. The property standards, number 10, is really exciting, because that, I think that also is a great tool against the NIMBYism that can sometimes be associated with affordable or social housing projects. I'm getting consistently 1 to 2 calls per week on property standards issues that people are struggling with. And I do think our current bylaw is broken, because it doesn't seem to be that our bylaw officers have the tools they need in the property standards bylaw to come to an enforcement. I think other things that come into that are temporary shelters, like those tarp garages and storing vehicles, which is a problem across town. Number 12, the residential information development guide would, I think, be incredibly useful for everybody that's trying to get a building permit. A really clear explanation of how to build a firewall, how to add extra units to your building, what kind of what's the ABCs to getting that building permit, and doing it quickly, and what kind of time expectations to expect when you're going into one of those projects. Last, number 15, I think it's great that the not-for-profit housing, and I appreciate Jeff Mills participating in the task force. I think not-for-profit housing in Smith Falls is something that we don't have. I can't think of any examples that we have already. And there's a lot of perceptions where people project what they know about social housing or what they know about kinds of housing they are familiar with onto not-for-profit housing. I think the image in the report of the housing continuum that breaks down all the different types of housing was really helpful. And I think as much as the town, we need to encourage and work with not-for-profit housing developers to bring them to town. I also think an education campaign is necessary. I think we've got underused buildings in town that would be ideal for this kind of project, and it's just because people have a hard time visualizing it. It's I see a lot of NIMBYism. I see a lot of I really appreciate the Housing Task Force for reaching out to St. Francis where there's a vacant building, and trying to get some traction there. But it just we seem to get lost in the weeds of what these would look like, and I think that's where the educational campaign would be important. We've definitely got the need for it, and we've got the partners that are really excited to come in and work with us on it. So I'm hoping that we can get some examples of that coming to town in the near future. Any further, Mayor Penko?
I just want to draw back to, I guess more a question from Councillor Dwyer regarding the public education pieces. And this came out of the task force, also came out of the housing summit I attended in Carleton Place earlier in the year. And it arises significantly out of the feedback I hear from people on an all too frequent basis, citizens of ours who have been evicted or are being evicted. And some of those are the rent evictions, and where someone has purchased a building, the tenants are forced to leave during a period of renovations, which may take 3 months, 6 months or longer. Many not aware that they have every right to go back into their unit once that renovation is complete. Right? Many times they do not understand. And furthermore, they tend to move on and they don't know. They often don't know the rights. And the lead clinic in Perth has volunteered to do some workshops, and we had planned for that just pre-pandemic. And of course, the pandemic set everything aside. So I think our role in that would really be limited to enabling, to maybe providing some community space if people are allowed to gather again at some point, or maybe helping facilitate a Zoom. But in conversations with the legal clinic, as an example, every day there are people calling them saying, I'm a tenant in most cases. I'm being evicted and I don't know my rights. And I can say the feedback from them is that the vast majority, upwards of 90% of the times that they support a tenant in those situations, the tenant is remaining housed. And if the best solution to affordable housing that we can help support immediately is keeping our citizens housed. If you're housed in a place where you've been for a few years, odds are your rent is below market rent, and you're much closer to affordability than you would be if you have to hit the open market again. So everything we can possibly do to try and keep our citizens housed in their current environments, the less new affordable units we're going to have to provide for them in the future. And it's not a quick fix, and there are a lot of great landlords out there, but it's just important that everyone understands their rights. And I think we can be an enabler in that environment.
Thanks, Mayor Penko. Any final questions, comments? Seeing none, so I'm hearing a consensus that we want to keep moving this forward as a priority, and there'll be a public consultation through Speak Up Smith Falls where our residents can weigh in. Thank you, Mayor Penko. We're going to move now to our in-camera issues. First is 8A, acquisition of land. Councillor Dwyer.
Sorry, my apologies. I actually have to leave. I'm double booked in council meetings tonight. So I have started my next meeting, which means that I have to adjourn this meeting, and I will see you all next week. But good luck in camera. Okay, good night.
Thank you, Councillor Dwyer. Councillor Brennan, did you have something?
I was going to move that we go in camera.
Excellent. Do we have a seconder? Councillor McKenna, all those in favor? Okay, carries. So Dave, we will move in camera. Council went in camera to discuss two items. The Rise and report for item 8A is that council gave staff direction regarding a potential acquisition of land. And the Rising report for 8B is that council gave direction to the mayor regarding a proposed acquisition of land. With that, we get to the end of our agenda, and I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Councillor Alfred, seconded by Councillor Allen. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you to Dave for getting us on and off the air.